Hello and welcome to Grid Live Wrap Up. Joe Samaniego here, along with Ben Schneider from Grid Encore. A little bit of a surprise that we went on the air so quickly. A little bit of glitch with the intro, but we're on the air. A big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin, Michelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew, for investing in the Grid Network. You too can invest in us through Patreon. Link in the video description. We also accept super chats. Buy me a coffee, whatever you like to do, and we'll thank you on the air once we catch it. Ben, let's talk about Talladega. Of course, that's the big one. Speaking about the big one, 28 cars collected, the largest big one in the modern era. And one of the big things, I think we saw a little bit of a big headache that occurred with the damaged vehicle policy after the big one. Because we saw drivers like Chase Briscoe, Chase Elliott, they stay in their cars. They're instructed to even block the latch so nobody could put down the window net, stay in the car, try to get a tow. They got towed back along with Harrison Burton, other drivers trying to do that. John Hunter Nemechek trying to get going, making burnouts in the back. And all because they just know if they step out of the car, put the window net down, they're done for the day. I feel this mess has gotten really out of hand, Ben. From Watkins Glen, where it was Ryan Blaney, that first lap, okay, you seriously couldn't drive the car back. You were just damaged. That seemed straightforward, but just very unfortunate. A few weeks later, Josh Berry at Kansas, he got spun around in the crash. Very little damage, but he was done for because he couldn't get going with the flat tires. And they said, well, you were in the crash, so you're done for the day. 1 week later, we have this mess where Chase Briscoe was getting towed facing the wrong way. Back bumper up in the air. I just can't believe this. Do you have a better understanding of this damaged vehicle policy, or is this just becoming a bit of a mess?
I don't, Joe. I've never understood this policy. I don't know why it exists. I think it is the most counterintuitive, asinine policy that we have in NASCAR today. And you know how I feel about certain other rules in this sport that have come into effect here in the last 20 years. Hello playoffs, hello NASCAR overtime, hello stage racing, hello NASCAR charters, which are back in the news again because of the lawsuit going on with 2311 in front row. But I at least understand the rationale behind all of those. This is one where I don't even understand the thought process behind it. I've just heard part of Elton Sawyer's media availability and him talking about how we don't want to put good cars out of the race. We don't want to, create any sort of confusion with this situation here. But that's all that we've gotten ever since this system was introduced, this policy was introduced here. I remember when it was just 5 minutes. Now it's fortunately a little bit longer than that. But I think that if I had to think of a rationale for it, it would be this idea that if your car is so damaged in a crash that you have to take it back to the garage in order to repair it, there's no sense in you coming back out there on track. I disagree with that, but I think this rule that has been created now with this policy is completely counterintuitive, because if the goal was to prevent rushed repair jobs being done as quickly as possible in the garage to go out and log as many laps as you can, well, now you've coupled that with the fact that you have to remain on pit road and you have limited resources and limited tools in your garage stall or in your pit stall rather than your garage spot in the garage there. You have limited resources and you have limited time. You only have however many minutes it is to get your repair job done. And then you have to go out there and try to putter around fast enough to make a minimum speed. If anything, it just creates an even bigger problem than we had with guys coming back out of the garage. And since we're at Talladega today, Joe, I remember the spring race here in 2009 when, everybody remembers the finish with Brad Keselowski and Carl Everts and everything. But if I recall correctly, I believe that was the race where there was a wreck very early on, I think lap 8 or lap 10 or so, very early in the race, took out a bunch of cars. And Clint Bowyer was on this DNF-free streak, running at the finish streak that dated back, I think, like 2.5 years. It was up to something like 70 or 80 races. And he got caught up in that wreck. And he ended up having his crew in the garage for the entire 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever it was, for the remainder of the race. They were going at that car, trying to repair it and get it to the point where he could come back out and just log a couple of laps at the end of the race, which he did, and be credited with running at the finish. And I love that. That's a never give up attitude. That makes it may not make a difference to some fans, but we talk all the time about major playoff implications, 1 point above the cut line or below the cut line. You just never know when these points are going to make a difference. And this time of year, more than ever, every point matters. Every position matters on track. And so for these drivers to be told, you can't even let them take the window net down because the window net possesses some sort of magical power that puts you out of the race like this if they take it down, it's just absolutely asinine to me. I don't understand why this is still a rule, because NASCAR apparently can't even enforce it with their own. I mean, at least they're consistent on being inconsistent. What do we talk about all the time, right? Consistently inconsistent. Chalk up another point for them in that column here with the DVP. I don't understand it at all. And even Bob Pockris, I think in interviewing Josh Berry in the bullpen after he was taken out, even Bob said, I hope they change the rule next year because it's tough for us to keep track of as journalists, and clearly the drivers and crew chiefs feel the same way. So again, it's never a rule I've liked. It's a rule that I've never fully understood. And certainly this year more than ever with the next gen car and all the issues that car has gone through in the almost 3 years that we've had it introduced now, I think it's only just further accelerated the problems and highlighted the flaws even more with the DVP. And if you ask me, we don't need to reform the policy. We don't need to revise the policy. We need to abolish the policy. And I hope that they do that in 2025.
Something needs to be done where we don't have this again, because the teams were frustrated. I could tell you, I know there's fans that were frustrated. It's like red flags lifted, but we still have 5 or 6 cars with drivers waiting for a tow. And then we all have this confusion of what's going on. The broadcasters didn't have a clear idea what was going on. And it was just so funny because how Elton Sawyer said this rule is meant to, not prevent good cars from being out of the race. Well, it seems to be what I've been doing the most. Ryan Blaney, they could have probably gotten to the pits, fix a part. Maybe they had to go to the garage area to fix the steering. Come back out. I bet no more than 10 laps down and complete a Watkins Glen. Josh Berry at Kansas, he just needed 4 fresh tires, maybe some tape here and there, get going. But you look at Chase Elliott's car, it was like, you were clearly in the crash. You did not just spin and get 4 flat tires. You got 4 flat tires. You got stuck in the grass, and you got all this damage to where you were not a factor at all. So I'm just sort of at a loss of this rule because, like you said, I believe it was 2017 it was introduced, and that's where we also have a lot more of these playoff focus, every single point. What's wrong with the idea of, okay, you're going to have a car coming to pit road, you're going to be working on it throughout the day. A team goes back to the garage area, comes back. I would support the idea of you go to the garage area and you have one attempt to come out, meet a minimum speed, simplify it, but this is just getting a little bit too ridiculous. I mean, even just following on the media side, you have a separate window for the damaged vehicle clock. You hoping that they meet the minimum speed. I just don't understand how this has gotten to the point where NASCAR, I feel, has lost control of how they're enforcing this rule, because today I think was just a mess. I know we still would have gotten overtime, but I don't think we would have gotten to the full 195 laps. We probably saved 2 or 3 laps if we didn't have to wait for tows for 5 cars out there.
Yeah, Joe, and to your point as well about the points and the results that I just pulled up here from that Talladega race, I just want to make sure I get everything right here. But Twitter, if you're on Twitter, you'll get this reference. This isn't Formula One. That all blew up a couple of years ago with teams running the same sponsor on multiple cars and everything. But I think in this situation, I think we can say this isn't Formula One, because in Formula One, only the top half of the field gets points. So if you spin out into the gravel and you lose 2 laps, even if your car has no damage, there's really no point in you staying out there, right? In fact, you probably want to retire the car because you don't want to waste miles on your engine and your parts and everything. You want to save those resources. In NASCAR, every position is 1 point, right? Every point matters. Every position matters. I just pulled up the results from the 2009 Aaron's 499 here. Mark Martin, Jaden McMurray, Scott Riggs, David Gilliland, they were all in that crash. I guess it happened on lap 7, like I was mentioning. So they're all listed as six laps complete with an accident as the reason for DNF. So Clint Boyer is listed as 8 laps complete, but he's running at the finish. So not only does he keep that streak going, if he was running behind Gilliland or Riggs at the time, I don't know off the top of my head if he made any positions up from that, but maybe that's at the time 3 or 6 points that he would have made up. And who knows if that makes a difference come race 26 for a chase for the Cup cutoff. I remember Larry McReynolds joking in the booth about how, AJ Allmendinger and Casey Kane, Allmendinger was, this looks like 31 laps ahead of Kane at the time. So Kane was just trying to teach Allmendinger how the 2-car draft is working, because AJ was still only in his 3rd full-time season and everything. And they were just going out to log laps to gain AJ some experience. Great, good for him. But then the battle between Jeff Gordon and Kevin Harvick was a battle for position, even though those guys were 50-plus laps down, because they had the same amount of time spent in the garage area and came back out onto the track around roughly the same laps. They were actually fighting for a few points there. So, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe the average fan doesn't care about that. But I feel like in an era where we put so much emphasis on who's 1 point above the cut line, we've got the announcers screaming in the booth, look at this is major playoff implications here. So-and-so is 1 point to the good or 2 points outside where he needs to be. These are the kind of battles that we would be all over if we didn't have the damaged vehicle policy, if we still had the ability to make higher quality repairs in the garage area and send these guys back out to gain 2 or 3 spots, to gain whatever points they could have a shot at gaining, and that could potentially make a difference for their championship. You just never know. So it's an incredibly frustrating rule to me. And like I said, I think there's no better way to revise the system and get rid of this controversy than just getting rid of the rule altogether. Joe, I remember before we came onto the air, we were talking about Mark Martin's car and that famous image of his hood completely torn off, his front bumper completely torn off. It looks like he's driving a modified, and he's got the number 6 that's just taped or drawn on the side of his car. Like, I miss those days. I wish we could get back to that, but we're never going to get back to that if we still have a DVP.
Yeah, you can't get to it with the DVP. And I get the idea of maybe NASCAR saying, hey, we don't want a car to go out there, cost 3 or 4 cautions because of debris falling. We'll just make a rule that you have as much time as you want to fix the car, whatever you need to do. But if you go out there and a part drops and you cause a caution, maybe 3 strikes or whatever, something like that, where you don't have drivers and teams begging, we just need a tow. We don't have to, we just need a tow. Because this was just really was not a fun moment of the race where we're just waiting for tows and the tow truck drivers. And it's not fun for the tow truck teams, all those people's crews. They're being told, hey, you need to get a tow. Drivers are telling them no, preventing them from doing anything. It was just a mess. In the chat room, incredible to see 4 white and didn't wreck at all. I gotta say, Ben, I think when it comes to Talladega, this race, on the surface, this was like a typical super speedway. You had the 3 wide, the 4 wide, the big one, the largest big one. But I think it's also showing sort of the mess NASCAR has, the damaged vehicle policy, the fact that with this generation of car, you really can't get a good run. And the reason why we had 3 or 4 wide, fuel saving. Everyone was just saving fuel throughout the day to have as small of a pit stop as possible to pick up positions. I just don't think when it comes to super speedways this year, I feel like this race probably is not one of the better ones. I would look at more the first Talladega race, which I know was a lot more crazy. We had the crashes, but overall, I just feel like this race, along with the DVP controversy, I just feel like this is one of those races where you talk about Talladega, the best races all time. I don't think this is going to crack the top 5.
Joe, if you can still hear me, I can't hear you. You were cut
loud and clear from you. So just the internet,
okay.
I think.
I guess it's probably on my end then. Yeah.
No worries. But yeah.
Okay.
I was just saying.
I've got nothing here. Absolutely nothing. Let me try, Joe. If you want to keep going with whatever points you were making, I'll try leaving the studio and coming back in. Apologies to all the viewers here. Looks like we're having internet trouble on my end.
The internet gremlins, or maybe the NASCAR wanting us to stop talking about the damaged vehicle policy. Either one of those. This race overall for Talladega standards, as I was saying, it's easy to just look at, well, did you have 3 or 4 wide racing? Yes, that checks. Did you have some unpredictable crashes? Yes, you did. Did you have the big one? Yes, that occurred. But with a damaged vehicle policy, we've seen better racing where they're truly running 3 or 4 wide, flat out, not fuel saving and drafting. I just don't think it was exactly the best super speedway race in the damaged vehicle policy. I'm just sort of surprised, man, considering we're coming off Kansas with what happened with Josh Berry. NASCAR has a driver's meeting. Did nobody think of just saying, hey, can we clear up this damaged vehicle policy before Talladega? Because we know if there's not the big one, there's going to be 5 or 6 crashes where you're going to have 6 or 7 cars taken out.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not convinced that they didn't have those conversations. I would have to think everybody knows coming into Talladega how wild and crazy it's going to be. And by the way, I mean, I don't want to sound completely negative here, like this was an absolutely terrible race or anything. I think the ending was a little bit farcical with, Joe, I guess you said 28 cars. I didn't know what the number was exactly. I don't know if that includes like Ricky Stenhouse, for example, who had that massive donut on his door, but obviously saved the car and ended up going on to still win the race. But that's technically damage. I don't know if he's part of that 28. Technically, so to speak, there. But regardless, still a massive, massive crash. It's a shame that we couldn't get through the race, without having at least one of those. But then again, I guess that's just Talladega for you. But fantastic 4-wide racing all throughout the first stage. I could not believe. I mean, it was giving me flashbacks rather to the 2012 fall race and the finish there. And obviously got very close to about half a lap away from being able to finish that one before Tony Stewart threw the block on Michael Waltrip and caused, I think that was 25 cars that day or something like that. And only a few of them finished without damage or with minimal damage at least. But, we didn't see that in stage one. Everybody was pretty much well behaved. And then we had the incident with Blaney and Chastain. I guess Bowman was a little too aggressive on the bumper, you could say. But fortunately, that one only took out a couple cars. Daniel Suarez, I think, had a very ill-advised block the opening part of the first stage. But fortunately, he was really the only one. I guess BJ McLeod probably had some minor cosmetic damage from that. But on the whole, I think it was shaping up. I've been saying this after every Daytona Talladega race, it feels like, for the last several years. It was a pretty good fill-in-the-blank 400 or fill-in-the-blank 450, and then we get to the last 50 miles, and we, of course, have the big one or the huge one or multiple big ones or whatever the case may be. But, yeah, I think, obviously, like we've been talking about this entire segment here, if it's not on the forefront, if it wasn't on the forefront of NASCAR's mind, on the drivers' minds going into this week's drivers' meeting or going into this weekend, I think it certainly has to be now. And even as Bob Pockrass mentioned, I think even the journalists are going to start to question what we're doing here and maybe write some columns advocating for at least some clarification. Maybe they're not going to go as far as I would and say we need to get rid of this rule entirely. I'll still stand by my opinion on that. But I think everybody's pretty much in near universal agreement at this point that we have to change at least whatever situation we have next year. It can't be this. The status quo is not good enough because nobody really knows the ins and outs of what this policy really means anymore.
Yeah, I would love to see the damaged vehicle clock go away. I honestly sort of just don't see how it adds value to the product. It just essentially takes away, your team could get the repair done in 6 minutes or less, you're going. But if it took you 7 minutes, well, you're done. I just don't see how it adds value to the sport. I would really hope to see this damaged vehicle policy just reformed to a point where it's just, hey, as long as you're out there in the track, you're making the laps, meet the minimum speed, not causing a caution because you keep dropping parts here and there or leaking oil. Hey, you're adding to it. And of course, as you said, every single position is important because it's worth an additional point. Why have it where it's like, okay, you had flat tires, you couldn't drive back. Maybe you could have kept running, but since you put the window net down, you're out for the day. That's just not the way to do it. Hopefully they address this because we got the Roval. I anticipate we're going to see some cars crashing out here and there. Las Vegas, there's been some good crashes there, some hard hits. Then you have Homestead and, of course, Martinsville, a short track. They really need to do this because we do not want to be talking about this damaged vehicle policy throughout the remainder of the playoffs.
Yeah, but Joe, that's just it. I mean, imagine if we have a couple of cars crash at Martinsville and, maybe it's right on the edge of, do you need a pushback? Do you need a tow back? Or can you fix it on pit road or something? And that's one of the playoff drivers. Or imagine if, crazier things have happened, like what happened at a truck race last year, happens on a mid-race restart at Phoenix for the championship, and all 4 title contenders are caught up. I mean, I know it would take a perfect storm, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. And I do think one of these days, with the laws of averages, it's probably going to happen where you've got a situation where, this policy is going to come into effect and could potentially change the outcome of a championship. So, we'll see. But I think that, just because we're coming up, I don't usually advocate for this. I usually advocate for, let's wait till the offseason to make a rule change. But when it's something that is going this badly and is this egregious, I think maybe this might be an exception. And we could say, if we're not going to totally change the policy outright, let's at least clarify it before we go into the Roval for sure. And then however many races we have after that, I guess 5 total with the round of 8 and then the championship in Phoenix.
Yeah, and like you said, Martinsville, a short track beating and banging. If somebody's championship line is because, oh, well, did it get a toe? We don't want to be saying, well, that toe was what helped them to preserve their. No, it's go out there, race. Oh, they were a second late on the Danfield clock. They're done for the day. And there's the playoffs over. That does not add value to what we're doing. Nobody wants to see that. So, yeah, they had to do something before we hit the next round. Of course, we'll hear probably from Elton. Usually Tuesday, he's on NASCAR Sirius XM radio. Hopefully there's some clarification. And if not by then, the driver's meeting. There has to be something. I'll be shocked if they don't do anything. One of the things with this race, Austin Cindric, I thought he had a really good shot at getting this win. What a story that would have been from 12th up towards the top of the playoffs because no playoff driver had won. But unfortunately, his day ended because of the front bumper of Brad Keselowski. And Brad Keselowski, not only in this Talladega race, but the last Talladega race, spun out Michael McDowell on the last lap, costing another Ford to win. Here we go again. Overall, this was costly for Ford in general. Logano was in the crack. He is now 13 points below the cut line. Austin Cindric DNF because of that crash, 29 points below the cut line. Blaney got lucky. He went out super early with his hard crash, with everyone crashing out. He's at plus 25. He has to feel pretty good. But for Penske, are they in trouble going from 3 drivers into playoffs to 1 after the Roval?
Yeah, well, and Blaney has the benefit of a 4th place finish at Kansas to fall back on, plus even a handful of stage points. Even when he crashed out of stage 2, I think he still crossed the line in 8. So, excuse me. So he still picks up 3 stage points from that. But yeah, Penske's in trouble. I'd be shocked if all 3 of them make it. I guess Cindric's probably more in a must-win situation. He has been proven to be a pretty good road course racer in the past, so wouldn't put him shocking the world at the Roval, so to speak, past him. And Joey Logano, I guess, if he gets some stage points, not totally outside the realm of possibility that he could still point his way in here. So by no means would it be impossible, but I think it's much more likely that Penske's only going to have 2 of their drivers. If they even have 2, they could only have 1, or they could have none. Blaney's not quite safe either, especially if, we get a winner in that 9th to 12th range that completely disrupts the playoff grid even more here. So, we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, I think they're certainly Logano and Cindric for sure. You can't be feeling pretty good. They're probably not going to get very much sleep this week. Blaney, I would say, is feeling relatively good. He just has to go out and perform at a track where he's won before. Who can forget the inaugural Roval race and that crazy finish with Johnson and Truex spinning out and Blaney sneaking through to steal that win. So I think he's probably going to be okay. But there are no guarantees with this format. And I think if you're Team Penske right now, the chances of you putting all 3 of your cars into a round of 8 certainly took a massive hit here today.
Took a massive hit. I think for Logano, especially his position in the points at the Roval, he's going to have a really tough battle on the hand where he's essentially him and Chase Elliott, 13 positions. He would have to hope like Chase Elliott has something where similar to when Harvick wrecked him at the Roval years ago, but he managed to keep running, just be above the cut line. I just don't see Joey Logano outperforming Chase Elliott that race. And for the Ford teams, I was sort of surprised, Ben. I felt the Ford teams, they qualified up towards the front. Michael McDowell led the most laps out of all the Ford drivers. And I kept thinking, okay, we're going to see the Ford drivers just dominate. But I was sort of surprised they did not pit later like they used to do in the past. They tried to pit earlier. They got more spread out. We saw Chevrolets and Toyotas take the front. Towards the end, they tried to come together, but it just did not seem like they were on their own up to their top level of performing. I just felt like maybe they tried a little bit too different. And next thing you know, this big crash occurs. As they were lapping Todd Gillian, who unfortunately his good day came to an end when speeding penalty in that last round of pit stops. He was getting a lap. Then the big one occurred. Just a tough break for them. But I will say this. William Byron, Rudy Fugelman started to make me a little bit of a believer because he has scored a lot of points throughout this race. One thing that really stood out was how Rudy Fugel, as they were entering stage 3, told William Byron, look, you could finish 21st. We'll still have over 30 points above the competition. If you feel uncomfortable, just drop back. He avoided the big one, and he is the first driver to secure a spot in the round of 8 on points. So he doesn't have to worry about the Roval. Do you believe William Byron, Rudy Fugel, they're back after being silent for such a long time during the season?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess if silent is not going to victory lane, then maybe they're not quite back yet. But I think they have had some top 5s and top 10s, all throughout the summer months and everything. But certainly you look at the races leading into the playoffs, a couple of DNFs, 27th at Daytona and 30th at Darlington. And then, again, not such a great round of 16. We didn't need a great round of 16 because they had some playoff points from their wins earlier in the year. But then, second in Kansas and third today at Talladega, I think, they're certainly, they're in a position where they don't necessarily need the wins to guarantee themselves a spot in the next round. If they just go out and finish in the top 5 or top 3, as it's been the case for the last couple of weeks here, they're still going to be in good shape. And we've had 2 non-playoff drivers win each of the first 2 races of this round, but they've still punched their ticket to the round of 8 because of how massive a points gap that they have over the cutoff line here. So, I think they're certainly, you can't write them off as not championship contenders here. I think, we're at a point in the season where they're certainly, maybe starting to peak again. And, wouldn't surprise me if they won a race coming up here in the round of 8 and punch their ticket to the championship 4. We'll just have to wait and see. But I think they're certainly trending in the right direction. That's for sure. And to escape from the chaos, stay with another strong 3rd place finish has to be leaving that team feeling pretty good.
They have to be feeling pretty good. I think when you look at the points entering the Roval, especially the drivers, Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell, they just need to score points in that first stage. They're through. I feel really everyone in the top 8 has to feel pretty safe. I mean, Chase Elliott has won at the Roval. Tyler Reddick's good at road courses in general. Blaney, Bowman, there's no reason why they should have a decent day. Same with Hamlin. Do you feel like almost the Roval is almost set up to where it's going to be quite predictable and really the only thing you got to worry about is being 8th place and we have a new winner? I almost feel like it's sort of to the point where Talladega shook up the standings, but it made it to where it's more straightforward entering the Roval, not as unpredictable like when we entered Talladega.
I don't know, Joe. I don't think these margins are quite big enough for that here. I think everybody from Blaney up potentially, but you look at Chase Elliott. I mean, if Joey Logano goes out and sweeps both stages, there goes Chase Elliott's points. I mean, I guess it would depend on how many points he picked up in the stages as well, but that would be 20 points in Logano's favor, and then that gap is just erased. And then honestly, you look at where Blaney, Bowman, and Hamlin are. Even that they wouldn't quite be safe if they have some bad luck, take them out of contention, leave them with a poor finish. So Byron for sure, obviously, is already through. Christopher Bell and Kyle Larson, I think, have to be feeling pretty safe. Hamlin, Bowman, and Blaney, I would be surprised if they end up falling out. But, think back to the Indianapolis Roval, I guess you can call it, because it does use the main straightaway of the oval. I guess you can call it a Roval in one sense. But in 2021, Chase Briscoe obviously didn't finish up there because he cut the course and then spun Denny Hamlin out. But, he was up front. He's got a lot to prove right now with the Stewart-Haas team. It's closing. Austin Cindric, like we just mentioned, is a pretty good road course racer. Daniel Suarez has a road course win at Sonoma, and Joey Logano's a 2-time Cup champion. So I'm not saying I would put money on any of those 4 guys winning the race, but I don't think, with how unpredictable the Roval is, I look at this playoff grid here and I think, okay, the top 8 there, have to be feeling pretty good about their chances individually. But I think there's a difference between feeling good and feeling safe. So I guess that would be my answer here. I think if you're Chase Elliott, sure, this is a track that you've won at before. You're a Cup champion. You just have to go out and execute, and if you do that, you should be all right. But again, with how unpredictable this track is, with how unpredictable this system is, I can't look at a 13-point gap knowing that there's 20 points on offer in the stages alone and think of that as a situation where Chase can be sleeping pretty well this week, knowing that he has all but punched his ticket. I don't think it's that situation at all. I think Chase is going to have to make sure that he goes out and hits all his marks next weekend. And even with that, has to hope that none of those 4 guys in the 9 through 12 positions steal a win here and completely shake up the points even more.
Exactly what Alonso said. Any of the bottom 4, in his opinion, could win. If you're in 8th place, you're in trouble because you'll be the first one to be bumped down. And Chase Elliott, I mean, granted, he's one behind Tyler Reddick. That's going to be a very interesting battle between Tyler Reddick and Chase Elliott next race weekend. I wonder how much of the 2 teams will be facing the other team, just watching what they're doing, trying to just point race them. But end of the day, I got to say, I think from Blaney up, they had to feel solid just as long as they don't have a big screw up go out there. But also, potentially another non-playoff driver could show up because we haven't talked about the winner yet. Ricky Stenhouse Jr., another super speedway win. So he prevented anyone from locking in to the round of 8 based on wins. He won last year the Daytona 500. He's always a contender to do super speedways. Earlier in the race, I remember when he gapped to the front, I was just thinking, oh no, because he seems to be either too aggressive and ends up causing a crash or being crashed out, or he makes it all work out. And he did. He got to win. He still got some damage from that big crash on that driver's door. But now that 47 back in victory lane, and this is big for that team because I know they don't talk about the NASCAR point standings as much. But one of the big things, that 47 team in the driver standings, today he moved past Josh Berry, Ryan Preece, Noah Gragson, all of essentially the Stewart-Haas Racing teams not in the playoffs, up to 24th place. He is the 3rd non-playoff driver to win out of the 6 playoff races. I have to ask, because we know this is a small team, used to be 2 team, now it's just 1. Can the 47 make anything more of this win? Or is the next best bet the Daytona 500, the next super speedway?
They might have a little bit of positive momentum and a morale boost from this, but I think I said it in the chat. I feel like after the race ended, I think I said it in a couple chats. I think I said it in ours as well. But Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is to me our generation's Michael Waltrip. He's won 4 races. They've all been on super speedways. He got Talladega and Daytona in 2017 when he was still with Roush, and Daytona 500 last year. Obviously, now this race here today at Talladega, and those are his 4 wins. So we know, as aggressive as he is, and as much as he has at times earned the Recky Spinhouse nickname, which I think at times is a little bit unfair because he certainly did a heck of a job hanging on to his car and saving his car and bringing the car home in one piece and parking in victory lane even. So a fantastic effort from him today. But I think he is certainly known as having his strengths be the super speedways, and this is the last one of those this year. So, and also, like you mentioned, Joe, as well, JTG Doherty, as much as I think they've taken steps forward and improved as an organization over the last several years, I still don't think they're quite at that, point where they can go out and we can look at them as weekly contenders, even as much as I think Front Row Motorsports has. I mean, my goodness, really living up to their name this year. 6 poles this year for Michael McDowell. They've shown a lot of speed this season, and Michael even won a race on raw pace last year, the IMS road course. So I think JTG still has a little bit of ways to go, and I think Stenhouse has some room for improvement, certainly on the non-super speedway tracks, but on the super speedways for sure. I don't know what the odds are going to be for 2025 Daytona 500 here, but it's certainly a winning combination. They proved it once again today. They proved it at Daytona in 2023. I think that's certainly going to be their next best shot to park that 47 in victory lane.
Yeah, the Daytona 500, Talladega, I feel those are the races where that 47 has to say, this is our opportunity to win. They don't have the resources or speed for other racetracks, really. Maybe a short track if they survive, but it's the super speedways. Throw in there Atlanta, too. if they could continue this momentum, climb up the standings, get some more prize money, they could be in a good spot next year if they get a win prior to the playoffs. Because I think this really shows if they had gotten one win in the regular season, this win the playoffs, how crazy would it have been if a Ricky Stenhouse was in the round of 8? If Ross Chastain had gotten that win, talk about Chastain and Stenhouse, that would have been something else. He just so important to get that win or be very consistent and get the points in the regular season. This goes back to, again, what we talked about with that damage vehicle policy, and every single point matter because it's every single position. 17th place, the first position out of the playoffs. Chastain, after crashing out, being scored 40th, he is only 2 points ahead of Chris Buescher in the driver's standings. Now, of course, Buescher won in Bristol. The following week, Chastain at Kansas. This weekend is Talladega. Typical shakeup as we see. Now those two, only 2 points between them, and they're entering the Roval. Do you think any driver has the upper hand between Buescher and Chastain?
I don't know. I feel like based on team performance so far this year, I feel like I've been very impressed with RFK, and certainly the start of the year, maybe the hype isn't quite as big right now, but Buescher, then again, now that I think about it, just won Watkins Glen, and Brad Keselowski was in the mix here today, so I think maybe they're on the upper end of a rebound potentially as well. But like we just mentioned, Chastain's also won and spoiled the playoff party as well here with his win at Kansas, and he's got a road course win, his first win at Circuit of the Americas. So I think again, this is an interesting battle to follow. There's more to life than just the playoffs here. This is the third time now that we've had a non-playoff winner in the first 5 races, and I think maybe people will just say this is what makes our sport unique. But what other sport do you get to the postseason, get to your so-called playoffs, and still have non-playoff competitors out there disrupting the playoff grid? But that's the case here in NASCAR, for better or worse. And we've got a nice little battle right here between Chris Buescher and Ross Chastain for the most bragging rights of those that missed the playoffs this year. I don't know. It's tough for me to make too many predictions going into the Roval with how crazy that race can be. But I guess I'll say RFK rides some positive momentum from a near victory today, 6/1000ths of a second coming up short. Maybe some of that will rub off on Chris Buescher heading into the Roval. Maybe he will spoil the playoff party once again. We'll see.
I got to go with Chris Buescher as well, too. Just his experience. I think he could excel better. And just with Trackhouse Racing, I feel, okay, they were good at Kansas. But what's going on with Dan Swartz? He's nowhere in those last few playoff races. And then today makes a very clumsy mistake trying to get ahead of B.J. McLeod, putting himself 2 laps down. That essentially took him out of any contention. Whether it was the free pass, he got them, but he was still 1 lap down, finished quite low. I just don't think Trackhouse is exactly 100%. They're probably hopeful for just the offseason. Try to regroup and come back a little bit stronger. Try to get their 2 drivers into playoffs. You got Shane Van Gisbergen, who, let's give a shout out. He led some laps there, looking comfortable. I think he's going to be a contender next year. They just have to have a good, solid team for next year. And of course, 17th in the points, like you said. I think there's a lot of interest in point battle. People are not paying attention. Just the fact that this win alone put JTG Racing from behind all 3 Stewart-Haas racing teams to now ahead of the 3. Of course, Briscoe's in the playoffs, so can't get ahead of him. That's a huge statement for that single car team. Granted, Stewart-Haas is closing up shop. What an effort. It's just unfortunate, the playoffs. I get it. We're so enthralled of who's going to make the cut line, who's not going to make it through the next round. But we are losing out on some of this other fascinating storyline and points battles, because every point position is a different monetary bonus. So each one counts. And of course, next race weekend for them, Charlotte Roval, their backyard. That's going to be something else. They will be racing, but MotoGP, Ben, they're going to be off. And I think for the championship contenders, they need a well-deserved break.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to follow as well. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But Joe, like you were mentioning with Trackhouse, I would not put the playoffs past Shane Van Gisbergen either next year, because just looking at the schedule, you've got Coda, you've got the new race coming in Mexico City. He's obviously won at Chicago. He almost won Watkins Glen. That's going to be right before the playoffs begin next year. And then you've got Sonoma as well. So you're telling me SVG can't win at least one of those and get into the playoffs? I think he's certainly going to have a fair shot at getting into the postseason next year as well. So we'll keep an eye on that. But in the meantime, like you mentioned, Joe, a fascinating championship battle going on in MotoGP right now. I watched the wrap-up show with you and Kobe last week, and talking about how this seems to be a championship battle that nobody wants to win in many respects. Top two in the championship were your top two today, although not in that order. 10 points between Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia for the championship, but it was Bagnaia that swept the weekend with the sprint and the main race. Martin second in the race today as well. Of course, the winner gets 25 points in each MotoGP Grand Prix. Second place gets 20 points, so not quite as big of a reward margin-wise over second as you see in Formula One. But Joe, Martin cannot get points, or can't points race rather, if Pecco Bagnaia goes out and delivers perfect weekends from here on out. We have a weekend break, like you mentioned before. We go to Phillip Island in Australia, so 2 weeks' time before we see MotoGP back in action. Who do you think this off weekend will benefit the most? Do you think it'll change the momentum of this championship at all?
It's hard to say if it will change the momentum at all. I feel when it comes to the break, it has to feel good for Pecco Bagnaia, because we're not entering the break saying, what's wrong with Pecco Bagnaia? Why is he messing up? Why is he not gaining ground? Look what he did. He swept the race weekend. It's been a while since we've seen him do that. Start off with a sprint race, go out there, get the win. And it's not like he just got this from the pole and just dominated. Pedro Acosta had the pole. He had, unfortunately, some slip-ups, rookie mistakes, but who was there to capitalize? Pecco Bagnaia, sweeping the weekend. He has to feel really good entering the break. The team has to feel good, motivate. This is the factory Ducati team. They're the team that should be the ones everyone's aiming for to beat, not the customer team that's getting a year-old bike. Jorge Martin, I don't think he's going to enter this break nervous, thinking, oh gosh, they're catching up, or tile flashes are slipping away. He has to feel proud of himself. In the past, I feel Jorge would have easily override the bike, crashed out, and we talk about deficit, or him with barely a points lead. He still has a comfortable points lead. I know 10 points is really nothing. But if the two riders perform at their highest level at Phillips Island, which I gotta say, Phillips Island, especially for viewers that haven't watched it, that race sometimes looks like a big pack of just all the MotoGP riders. The closest finish in MotoGP is from there. This is going to be a very fun race next race weekend for them. Those two, you got Marc Marquez, Pedro Acosta. I really see this is going to be a very exciting closing out for the MotoGP Championship, and I think Pecco Bagnaia has to feel really good entering Phillips Island.
All right, we'll leave the MotoGP Championship there, but at the same time, Joe, this thrilling battle in MotoGP is also affecting the current grid ranking standings as well. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about how the top 10 looks after this weekend?
Yeah, the top 10 for the grid ranking. Once again, Pecco Bagnaia leads. He had been slipping down. His score is now 17.71. Still a very low score for grid ranking standards the last few years. They only have 4 races left. Formula One still has 6 races. And Supercar has 5 races total. Next race weekend is the Bathurst 1000 at the Charlotte Roval. Jorge Martin, he is back in second place, but just barely. So Will Brown, next race weekend, the Bathurst 1000, if he was to get a win, that could really put him up to second place. Maybe put a little bit of distance. It's been a little bit of a while since he had a strong weekend. And then looking at the rest of the grid ranking, some changes here and there, particularly the NASCAR drivers, all of them falling down after what happened at Talladega. No driver in the top 20. Just an inconsistency as they're crashing out, having issues. Of course, as I mentioned, NASCAR Cup Series, they're at the Charlotte Roval. We have the Bathurst 1000, the Crown Jewel race for the Supercar Series. IMSA's back next weekend for the Grid Endurance Performance Index, so be sure to tune in Wednesday Grid Tonight. Matt will be there to give the full update on the Endurance Performance Index. And of course, a lot of racing still left, but we're coming down to the end of 2024.
All right, definitely tune in on Wednesday for a great EPI update there, and lots of good racing to look forward to next weekend as well. But in the meantime, Joe, we're going to wrap up the show tonight here, and plenty of shining moments, I think, from today's race at Talladega and also from MotoGP as well. But what was the one that stood out to you for your one shining moment?
My shining moments come from MotoGP, and that was Pecco Bagnaia's great weekend. We've talked about time and time again. It just seems like he starts to rise up, looks like championship caliber, then he starts having mistakes. This could have been an easy weekend for Jorge Martin to just go out there, put a bigger lead on the championship, put more pressure on that Ducati team. Pecco Bagnaia stopped that from happening. He went out there, got 2 wins. He's doing what he needs to do. You have Jorge Martin. He's doing what he needs to do. He's not overriding. He's keeping us close. I think this is setting up to be a phenomenal championship battle that could potentially go to the last race. So MotoGP, Pecco Bagnaia making this interesting as my shining moment.
Well, forgive me for taking the obvious one, but I'm going to give my one shining moment to the winner of today's Yellawood 500 at Talladega, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I know has not been the season that they were hoping for over JTG Doherty Racing. They got into the playoffs last year with their win at the beginning of the year at Daytona. This year, they've gotten back to victory lane. Unfortunately for them, it came after the start of the playoffs, so they'll be capped at that 17th place result in points, just like everybody else who missed the playoffs will be. But nonetheless, still a good result for that team, a result that they needed heading into next year, and will hopefully, like we talked about today here on the show, provide them with some positive momentum to finish out the year. And then who knows, Stenhouse could potentially, hey, I called him the modern-day Michael Waltrip, right? 2 Daytona 500s in 3 years. Don't count Ricky Stenhouse Jr. out in 2025 at the Great American Race. That's my one shining moment for today's Grid Live wrap-up show.
And I know there'll be more shining moments tomorrow on Grid Encore Monday night. You and Brandon will be there. I think a shining moment coming from the Arkham series. Wednesday, Grid Tonight. Kobe, Matt, Josh will be on the air. Big thank you to Megan Birch for last weekend filling in. Friday, the women in motorsports. Trans Am, big historic achievement we saw there this weekend. We talk about that, plus much more. And then Saturday, Grid Life pre-race, the Bathurst 1000 Supercar Series Crown Jewel race, the Charlotte Roval. So even though we have those 2 races, we're going to be talking about them. A lot of excitement. And of course, IMSA as well on the wrap-up show on Sunday. For Binge Nighter, I'm Joe Sandiego. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time, and have a wonderful evening.